All right, so Chapter 5, Video 2, we're looking at the events that lead toward revolution. And another such event that will help contribute to the revolutionary spirit was something called the Gaspee Affair or the Gaspee Incident. The Gaspee was a British ship off the coast looking for smugglers, people violating the British laws. And that ship got stuck on a sandbar, and colonists rowed out to the ship, let them know that they were about to burn it so that the British sailors could get off the ship, and then they burned the ship down. And the British are going to implement a number of laws and punishments for this Gaspee incident. We're also going to see committees of correspondence begin. Samuel Adams is going to put together a statement of complaints against the British authorities, and it will spread through the colonies. And those committees of correspondence will start writing newsletters and so forth, and become a network of information through the colonies so that each colony could know what's happening in the other colonies. We see Samuel Adams start the Sons of Liberty, and Samuel Adams believed that Parliament did not have the right to pass any sorts of laws for the colonies whatsoever. And the British are going to consider him the most dangerous man in Massachusetts. So the most famous event done by the Sons of Liberty, we think, was the Boston Tea Party. Members of Parliament had passed some laws about the kind of tea that we could buy here in the colonies, and it turned out to be a tea company that a lot of members of Parliament owned stock in. And so we found it to be an outrageous law that we were having to buy this stock and then, pad the pockets of members of Parliament. So when some of this tea arrived in Boston Harbor, some members of the Sons of Liberty, we think, dressed up as if they were Mohawk Indians and went on board the ships and dumped the tea into the harbor. I have read that estimates are that the amount of money lost at that time was upwards of $1 million. So quite the opposite of padding the pockets of Parliament. It hurt them a great deal. So Parliament is going to pass a series of laws as punishments for the Boston Tea Party. The British called these laws the Coercive Acts. We call them the Intolerable Acts because, of course, we found them to be intolerable. The first was the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston until the tea could be paid for, which was crazy because that was the main way that people made money in Boston. The only way that that tea would be paid for is if the port were open. They also had passed a law where British officials accused of a crime would be allowed to return to England to stand trial for that crime. They passed a Quartering Act, which said that folks in the New York area would have to house a soldier in their home. They changed how the Massachusetts colonial government would act, and General Gage was put in charge as the governor of Massachusetts and the leader of the British forces in Massachusetts. We were very upset by these punishments, by these intolerable acts. The Virginia Assembly in particular met to discuss these acts, and they proposed a day of fasting as a way of protesting the intolerable acts. When the king found out about that, he dissolved the Virginia Assembly. They simply moved down the street to a tavern and had a meeting there where they decided to hold a meeting, a convention of sorts, the following September in Philadelphia. And we now know that that is the Continental Congress. Today we call it the First Continental Congress, but at the time they didn't know that there would be a second one, so it was simply the Continental Congress. It met beginning on September 5th of 1775. There were 55 delegates there. Georgia did not go. And they are going to endorse something, the committee there will endorse something called the Suffolk Resolves, which declared the intolerable acts null and void, that we were not going to follow them. At the Continental Congress, they also urged Massachusetts to prepare to defend themselves. We knew that that's where the first strikes would come if the British military got involved. We also reaffirmed the boycott of British goods, thinking the best way to get them would be, again, in their pockets. There also was a Declaration of American Rights, which picked up the idea of John Dickinson that Parliament can regulate our commerce, but they don't need to tax us in the way that they had been doing so. It also said that they did not need to be involved in internal colonial affairs, and they didn't need to keep troops here either. When the king gets this information from the Continental Congress and learns that all of these different colonists had met in trying to decide how to protest British parliamentary action and the king's actions and so forth, the king, instead of trying to find some way to compromise or to work with us, he is going to declare the colonists in a state of rebellion.